now to introduce our presenter for tonight's lecture. Jim White graduated from the University of Delaware with a degree in entomology and applied ecology, and now teaches a course in herpetology at UD. He was one of the primary investigators for the 5-year Delaware Herpetological Survey from 1986 to 1991, and is an active contributor to the current 5-year Delaware Herpetological Atlas. Jim and his wife Amy authored the field guide Amphibians and Reptiles of Delmarva. He has also published many natural history articles over the years and is an avid photographer. Jim recently retired from the Delaware Nature Society, where he worked as a biologist for over 40 years. We can't wait to hear from Jim tonight, so at this point, I'll turn things over to him to get us started. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Amy. Thank you very much. Great to be here, and it's nice that you're a University of Delaware graduate also. Yes.
Yep.
Great. Well, hello, folks. Thanks a lot for attending this. I can't see you, so I'll just try to imagine what you look like out there. What I want to talk about tonight are a subject that is very dear to me. I spent a lot of time, a lot of fun too, surveying for amphibians and reptiles in this region. So tonight I'm going to talk about amphibians and reptiles in the mid-Atlantic states. We're not going to cover every species, or we'd be here very late into the night. So just a real quick refresher, and to remind you what I'm going to talk, the groups of animals I'm going to talk about. Again, the amphibians, you all have heard of salamanders, of course. We sometimes refer to them as the tailed amphibians, order Caudata. The frogs, order Anura, we refer to as the tailless amphibians because as adults, they don't have a tail. Only one species in the world has a tail-like structure. It's not a true tail. So you've heard of toads and frogs. Well, for our purposes, they're all frogs. A toad is just a type of frog. There are many types of frogs. There are tree frogs, there are true frogs, there are rain frogs, all kinds of, and these are families of frogs. So toads do not stand out from the other frogs. They are different than some of the other families, but basically they're all frogs. This group here, the Sicilians, maybe you've heard of this, I don't know. Order Gymnophionia. This is a relatively understudied group of amphibians. We, as North Americans, don't really know a great deal about them because they don't occur naturally in the US or in Canada. So you're not going to read about them in your textbooks very often. But we do refer to these as the worm-like amphibians. They are all tropical or subtropical in nature. So we're not going to talk about them tonight, but I just thought I'd throw a photograph of them. This is a mother and the young. So the reptiles, everybody knows a turtle. So order Testudines, the turtles. The lizards are in the order Squamata. They're in the suborder Lacertilia. And the snakes, notice the snakes are also in the order Squamata. So a snake is just a type of lizard. It's we do sometimes call it the suborder serpents. Well, alligators, crocodiles, and their relatives, Crocodilia, make up the third group. However, they do not occur in the mid-Atlantic unless you want to, they don't occur here. Farthest north that they occur in the United States at this point is North Carolina, just west of the Outer Banks. And the last group of reptiles is the one you may not have heard of unless you've traveled to New Zealand. This is order Rhynchocephalia, the tuateras. This is a lizard-like animal, but very different than a lizard. Really interesting biology. If you've ever been to New Zealand, you know about them because this is their poster animal. They have it on their money. Their baseball team's called the tuateras. So, but here we don't hear much about them. The last group are these guys. Avian reptiles. Now, we're not going to talk about avian reptiles because typically we call them the birds. And most of us probably think of them as kind of separate. And they are in a way, but they're really just dinosaurs. And dinosaurs are reptiles. But we call them the avian reptiles, and we do not discuss them when we talk about herpetology. That's the amphibians and the non-avian. So the mid-Atlantic, well, it's interesting. You can find different examples of what you would call the mid-Atlantic online. This is a typical one, though, that stretches from New York all the way down to Virginia. However, for tonight's purposes, we're going to be dealing with the central part right in here. Philadelphia, the Delmarva Peninsula into Maryland. Well, I'll talk a couple things in Virginia and maybe out to the mountains. I'll discuss a little bit. Not much about New York. The reason I'm doing that is twofold. One is it's really not my expertise to get too far away from the Delmarva Peninsula. My specialties are Delmarva and Florida. So, but I have spent some time up in the mountains of Pennsylvania and down the swamps of Virginia. So I'll talk a little bit about it. But this map here is the Delmarva Peninsula. And although I don't have Philadelphia on here, it is just north of here. So it might as well be on Delmarva. We have a lot of great habitats on Delmarva and the Mid-Atlantic in general. It's a temperate climate. So we have what we call the Appalachian Piedmont, which runs up through Philadelphia. It's the hilly version of the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Excellent habitat. And then if you go all the way down the bottom of the Mid-Atlantic, you get to the marine habitats, the dunes, the maritime forest. So you have a lot of variety. On the Piedmont here, we have the rocky streams, and around Philadelphia. As soon as you get up and where it gets off the coastal plain, you'll see very rocky streams. And then all those streams, of course, have tributaries. These tributaries originate, most of them, from springs coming out of the ground. We also have freshwater wetlands that pop up here and there, mostly on the coastal plain, but also sometimes in little pockets up in the Piedmont. As you get from Philadelphia south, you see salt marshes all through the coast of over by Tinicum, John Hines Refuge, all the way down to Delaware and New Jersey coast, all the way down to Virginia. Expansive areas of salt, Spartina, Florida salt marshes. And then the southern part of the peninsula, we even have bald cypress trees. So we have bald cypress swamp move up. So all these variety of habitats provide amazing areas for amphibians and reptiles, and of course, other wildlife. Now, we also have mountains in the Mid-Atlantic, according to the maps. And mountains are great habitat for amphibians and reptiles. I'm not going to talk too much about the mountains. Again, amazing habitat. I mean, I've done a fair amount of hiking up there. I've gone up there looking for amphibians and reptiles, but I'm not an expert. But it is a hot spot for salamanders. And I'm just going to show you, these are just a few. Almost every mountain will have its own salamander. So it's the center of biodiversity for the plathonid salamanders. And these are just a couple of the mountain dusky, cheat mountain salamander, cob, knob salamander, the seal salamander, the white lip salamander, Shenandoah salamander. Again, these things are all associated with the rich woods and streams in the Shenandoah Mountains in Virginia and up into the Catskills and up into the Adirondacks. But the main diversity is the Shenandoah Mountains and through the Smokies. And then this character here, this is the hellbender. And I'm not going to talk much about it. It is found in cool mountain streams. Just a really crazy animal. They get about over a foot long. They're highly endangered because these mountain streams over the years have become polluted or at least compromised to some extent. But they still do exist in the mountains. On the coastal, they used to occur very close to here on the Shenandoah. Excuse me, the Schuylkill River. And as far as we know, at least in the lower part of the Schuylkill down here on Delmarva, they do not occur anymore. I just threw this shot in there. This is how you look for hellbenders. You get these big forest log rollers, and you pull these large flat rocks up, and you look underneath of them. That's where they actually nest and hide during the daytime. I want to talk about a habitat that's dear to my heart. In fact, I was just telling Amy, I was in it last night with my University of Delaware herpetology class. So I had 29 students down here at night going out into this Delmarva Bay. And a Delmarva Bay is basically, here's a shot of them. It's a wetland that it occurs in forested areas. Of course, they were very common in southern Newcastle County, Delaware, going down into Maryland, and then a little bit more down around Lewis, Delaware. And if you look at this map, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. I'm going to move it around. Every little circle is a Delmarva Bay. And there were thousands of them in this particular area. Most of them have been lost to agriculture. If you look out here, this used to be a Delmarva Bay. Now the guy just made it a pond. You know, same thing. They plowed around them so much that they degrade the bays. And then if you look real close, you can see these little dark areas. We call them ghost bays because at one time they were Delmarva bays. But agriculture, of course, as you know, is 300 years old in this area, in the Philadelphia, Baltimore area. And all those years of plowing and growing crops has degraded most of the bays. However, there's still hundreds, 200 left, and they're mainly in state forests. So they're protected. The interesting, I know when I started, 45 years ago, and I was taken to one of these Delmarva bays, and I was just amazed by them. And there were researchers from UD and the U.S. Geological Service that were doing research on these ponds because they didn't know the origin of them. They couldn't figure out why they were there. Because as you look, there's no inflow or outflow in these ponds. No creeks going in and out. So they did a bunch of research, and there were theories even up to that point. One of the theories that they were created by an asteroid that broke up in the atmosphere and then created all these little divots. However, they did extensive, work to look for any sign that an asteroid had hit. Because if an asteroid hits, it will change the soil composition. You might not find a meteorite, but it'll definitely heat up and change the soil. They found no evidence of that. So they believe, the latest theory, that these ponds were created over 10,000 years ago, when this whole area, the Delmarva Peninsula, was a taiga, which is a very cold, you find that up in northern Canada and, in Russia, very cold, dry habitat, no trees. And in that area, the wind, of course, would blow constantly. And the wind over hundreds of years would scour out these depressions. And depressions would, there would be sand in there, and the wind would just swirl. It's called aeolian effect. And it's very interesting, and it's really, really fun when you're standing out in these ponds and think that they're that old. And again, the ones that are still in forest have persisted. Here's an aerial shot that gives you kind of a better feel for what they look like. Took this in a helicopter many years ago, but they're teardrop to round shaped. This is a shot, and looks like almost right around now, to be honest with you. The leaves are just starting to, maybe 2 weeks from now. And the pond is full of water. Notice that. No inflow, no outflow. And they found that the water is groundwater. It's ground when the groundwater table rises, it flows over a clay lens, and the water sits in there. Here's a shot. This would be about April, mid-April. And here's a shot in November. So every year, these ponds fill and they dry out. They start to dry out. It depends on the year, but they start to go down in August, and then they really get dry in October and November. And this is important because these areas are used extensively by amphibians. I'm going to talk more about that. But this dry down period is very important because it prevents fish from living in these ponds. And that's one of the reasons that amphibians can exist here in such high densities. This is just a map showing the regions of the Delmarva bays. Right here in again, central Delaware over into eastern shore Maryland, and then there's a few down here. There may have been more, but again, this was the breadbasket of the United States back in the 1700s. So every bit of land that could be farmed was farmed. So let's start talking about some species, some frogs. American toad. I'm sure you've heard of this guy. I'm going to kind of not really refer to the maps too much because these are Delmarva maps. But the American toad is found pretty commonly in the mid-Atlantic. And if you live in Philadelphia, you have them around Philadelphia or in the northern suburbs, very common. And they can live in your garden. This little guy, I made him a home. Actually, it's a female. I made her a home with a little flower pot. She liked to hang out. But American toads, like other toads in the family Bufonidae, have kind of a dry skin. And if you look real close, you see little white dots. I'm going to talk about them in a minute. The skin's very warty. Of course, you do not get warts from toads, but the skin is warty. They breed in these kind of very ephemeral pools, and they're just starting to breed now, although this last cold spell has kind of shut them down. That they'll probably, well, it's going to be cool all week, but if we get rain this week, they'll come out. They make their ways down to these kind of puddles, basically, and the males call. I'm going to try to play a video. Oops, sorry, didn't work. It's not working. Sorry about that. I'm not sure why the video is not working. But the males, again, make their way down there, call. They make a sound that goes something like that. And they're waiting for the females to arrive. And this is a male in amplexus on a large female. And he'll hold on to her and she'll make her way down to the pool. And if the other males don't harass them, which is happening here, sometimes you get a small male on a female and the other males try to take advantage of that. But if not, all goes well, the female will deposit her eggs and he'll fertilize them. And these are the eggs. They're laid in like spaghetti-like strands. Notice? And each egg, there's little black spots here. And this is the underside. The white is the underside. So there's hundreds of eggs that are laid just by one female. There's that white substance again I was talking about. This is called a bufotoxin. It's a very powerful toxin, a poison. And it's used to dissuade mammalian predators. So raccoons, skunks, mink, whatever. It's very, very powerful. And if you've ever had a dog that's been too curious about an American toad, sometimes they'll get a dose of it. It doesn't kill the dog, but it sure has a very strong effect. It has, first of all, it kind of burns, but also it has hallucinogenic effects. Very powerful. Does not affect reptiles. And this is a photograph of a northern water snake eating a American toad. There's another species, I'm not going to talk much about it, of toad in our area, called the Fowler's toad. You don't find it too much around Philadelphia. They're very scarce in Pennsylvania and north, but they're common as you go south of the coastal plain of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. And they make a call that sounds like whang. It's a lot different. Here's one calling. That's what an American toad would look something like that too. This is a vocal sac. This is just a photo I took. Typically, you get one male, one female, but every once in a while, another male holds on. I found these guys trying to get across the road one day. I'm not sure how it ended up, but I expect probably the female was not too happy about it. And the eggs of Fowler's toads are kind of like American toads, but they're a little bit more, they're clear. They're laid, the eggs are in pairs, and they're usually laid on the top with on grasses, connected to grasses. And for all you, real herpers out there, I'm sure you already know this, but it's one of those things is trying to identify or differentiate an American toad from a Fowler's toad. Sometimes it's difficult, but if you get a males, you can do it. This is the Fowler's toad, and this big thing is that gland, that parotoid poison gland. They also have these things called cranial crest. And in the Fowler's toad, the cranial crest actually lays right on the parotoid gland, where an American toad, it does not. Usually it either doesn't touch it or hits it, just touches it with a little spur. You can impress people at your next cocktail party with this. Another frog that I'm sure, or at least you've heard, the northern spring peeper. It's found, you notice on Delmarva, it's found everywhere. And it's actually found everywhere in the Mid-Atlantic. So this is a very widespread species found almost everywhere. And they're calling right now. I'm going to try to, hopefully play the call. Listen to it. That's an individual or two of them. That's a male. It's called a territorial call. And this is a full chorus. This is what you'll be hearing as soon as it gets warm again. If you visit any wetlands, any parks, you'll find that. The scientific name is Pseudacris crucifer. It has a cross on the back. Very pretty frogs, only about an inch long now. Heard more often than seen. Great tree frogs. These are the true tree frogs, Hyla. We have two species of great tree frogs, Hyla versicolor and Hyla chrysosceles. Interesting thing about these frogs, they look exactly alike. You can't tell them apart in the field unless you hear them call. Now, there's one other way, and that's to count their chromosomes, but obviously you can't do that in the field. But I'm going to play the call of one of them and tell you which one it is. That's the Cope's gray tree frog, a very fast trill. Okay. Oops, sorry. Now I'm going to play the Cope's tree frog. So that one was the Cope's tree frog is what I played, Hyla chrysosceles. I'm going to play the gray tree frog, Hyla versicolor. Very pretty, slow trill. These are very common in Delaware and Maryland. Not as common in Pennsylvania, but they are up there. And they actually move. Hyla versicolor ranges all the way to New York. A really nice summer sound. These guys won't start calling till it gets warm. We get those 75 to 80-degree days. Again, here's another photograph. They're really interesting frogs. Barking tree frog, another Hyla gradiosa. It's the rarest frog on the Mid-Atlantic. It's relatively common in the southeastern United States, but here you can see it only occurs on Delmarva, and it only occurs in these little gray areas. And even in those gray areas, only in a few ponds. This is the largest tree frog we have in North America. Native tree frog. Here's one here. Really interesting. I don't. One calling. guys are about almost 3 inches long. That voice is very, very loud. The interesting about that species, sorry, interesting about the species, it was not even known to occur as farther north of Virginia until 1985, when myself, a friend, and my wife found the population. And since I found several others in the same general area. We have no idea how the old-time herpers and biologists missed them, but somehow they did. This is a breeding pair. Wood frog, if any of you have gotten out, we're taking some walks 3 weeks ago on a couple of those warm days. You may have seen the wood frog, or at least heard it calling. Lithobates sylvaticus. It's found all over the mid-Atlantic. It's the first frog to come out in the spring, in the very early or late winter, actually, not even spring. The spring just started yesterday, or the day before. And they come out and really, and in large numbers. They make their way kind of the same kind of habitat, breeding habitat as the toad, the American toad. But the males make their way down first, and they call like the American toads. Here's another video if it plays. See the one here, one here, one here, one here. Notice the little balloons coming out of the side of their head. That's the vocal sacs. Here's a pair. Here's a pair right here. They breed in large congregations, which is fun. You hear people in the background. So the females, when the males, it's called amplexus when the male grabs the female. The female will take that male to a place in the wetland with the other females, because the females like to lay their eggs together. And in this photograph, you see a male holding on to well, we call it gravid, which is the term we use pregnant for cold-blooded animals. So this female is full of eggs. He's holding on. And he wants to be there, like this guy is, when the female is laying her eggs. These are the eggs. And as she deposits them, he'll fertilize them. Now, the sperm is clear, so you can't see it. And so he has to be there when that happens. You notice he's cupping them they cup them with their legs. These are the eggs. They laid in masses, so there's hundreds of eggs in there. Wood frogs are, because they come out so early in the spring, and they range very far north, all the way up into Canada. And they have some adaptations to deal with the cold. One of them is they can freeze solid. And this is an individual that I found under a rock sometimes in the spring, and it didn't happen this year, although last night was pretty cold. But sometimes we'll get a northern, what they call a northern clipper that comes down here. We'll get an extreme cold spell in February, late February, and sometimes even in early March. And we'll get a 3-day period that stays, frozen all day long. So the temperatures will be below freezing even in daytime. When that happens, these frogs they crawl down under a log and they freeze solid. And this little guy found, and it was pretty neat. When I tapped it, it felt like it was a piece of glass. It was really kind of fun. So I decided to take him into a kind of a warmer place in my garage and let him defrost and see what happened. And he did. And this is him. He even changed colors. And even though his body was almost frozen solid, he came right back to life as soon as defrosted. And this adaptation is not unique in wood frogs, but it's really well developed. And these are those eggs I was talking about. And they're also adapted to cold, because if that cold front comes down, the eggs will freeze also. Excuse me. And most eggs, amphibian eggs, would freeze and just die. I mean, the eggs would just blast. And but the females lay them all together and they create a big greenhouse. So the eggs on top freeze. See that? They're all frozen. Here's a close-up. And you can see all these dark things are the eggs, and they've actually what's called blasted. So when water freezes, it forms crystals, and those crystals are very sharp. And those that sharpness of the crystals puncture the cells and just destroy the egg. And as you can see, the egg, I pulled this up a little bit so you can see underneath. The eggs on top are dead, all dead, frozen. Underneath, they're fine. So it creates a greenhouse effect and keeps most of the eggs in good shape. And then, of course, when hatching comes, there's hundreds of tadpoles in these ponds. And they have to metamorphose fast because those ponds will dry up relatively quick. So they'll be out of that pond in 6 weeks. Some other frogs that you're very well, I'm sure you know, I won't talk too much about their biology, but the American bullfrog. This is the only species of amphibian that's actually eaten in this country. There are amphibians eaten in other countries, but not in this country. And when I'm growing up, my grandfather had bullfrogs all the time. Very ubiquitous. They're found everywhere in the Mid-Atlantic, found everywhere in the eastern United States, and they've been introduced all over the world for their food value. Here's a big old male, and you can see there's a couple mosquitoes feeding on it. Only reason I point that out is that we have over 50 species of mosquitoes here in this area. Very few of them feed on humans. The other ones feed on amphibians, birds, and other things. Here's a male. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this call. If you go to any pond in late May, June, even July, you'll hear this call. Kind of the summer chorus. It's really fun to hear it. Here's a chorus of them. And again, they wait for the warm weather. Green frog, it's kind of the look-alike of the bullfrog, the cousin. Looks very similar. It's not as big. It's very ubiquitous also. Not used for food because they don't get as large. The difference in them, if you notice, there's a ridge that goes right down the side here. This is the ear. We call it the tympanum. Males have a big tympanum. Females have small. There's that ridge again. The bullfrog does not have that. So if you catch a frog that looks bullfrog-like, look for that ridge. You'll be able to impress your friends. Green frogs kind of have not a very interesting call, but it's again you hear it at wetlands in the summertime, ponds. Nice summer feel. Again, they'll wait. They'll like the bullfrogs. They'll wait till it gets warmer. These are the eggs of a green frog. Bullfrogs look similar to this. They're just one sheet on top of the water that floats. So one egg layer thick. Not like the wood frogs. Southern leopard frog. You may have heard of leopard frogs. I don't know if you're anywhere near my age. We had to, in biology class, we had to do kind of experiments on them. We didn't do experiments on the southern leopard frog. We actually did them on the northern leopard frog, but nonetheless, very similar. This species is only found in the coastal plain. It does occur around the airport in Philadelphia. I did some surveys up there, and John Hines. Actually, that's I have to back that off. This species does not occur there. We used to think it did, and I'll explain that in a minute. Here's the call of the southern leopard frog. Got an interesting call. You have to come down a little into Delaware to hear these on the coastal plain now. This is the frog that's actually found around Philadelphia in John Hines. This is the Atlantic coastal leopard frog. Now, when I did my surveys years ago, back in the 90s, we thought this was the southern leopard frog. Actually, we did, except I started to notice, and a few others, that this frog gave a different call. It wasn't that same type of call, like chuck, 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 like the southern leopard frog. Anyway, we thought maybe we had another species. In fact, I wrote about it in my book that it's possible there was another species. But luckily, there were some researchers on Long Island that did some genetic work on them and found that there were new species. And you don't get too many new species in the mid-Atlantic. This was done about 12 years ago. But they look very similar. They do call differently. This is the kind of habitat. This could be John Hines for all that, but it's not. It's Bombay Hook. But freshwater wetlands, kind of near the coast. That was one calling. You can see they have the lateral vocal sacs like the wood frogs. Notice the call is different in singles. So it was kind of fun when the research finally figured, proved that this was another species. Okay, let's go through some salamanders relatively quickly. Tiger salamanders really don't occur north of, well, they don't occur as far as we know in Philadelphia area anymore. They do range to Long Island, New York, but they're very, very rare. But they do occur on Delmarva and in Virginia. They're the largest they're the second largest salamander in the United States, the largest in this area. And here's a big male going down, and they actually mate in January, sometimes in December. They'll make their way to those Delmarva bays. When they're full, males go down first, females follow, and the male will try to entice the female to mate. Here's a male. Usually there's a lot more males than females. Here's a photograph of a mature male and a younger male. This younger one can breed, but he probably will have a hard time competing with the larger ones. This is an egg mass. So if the male finds a female, he'll drop a spermatophore, a packet of sperm. He'll attach it to some of those weeds, stems on the bottom. Female, if she's interested, he'll try to encourage her to be interested. She'll walk over top of that spermatophore and then pick it up and insert it right into a cloaca. That'll fertilize the eggs. And then very soon after, she lays these egg masses, and you can see the individual eggs within. She'll lay 3 or 4 of these. Here's a close-up of those egg masses showing the eggs. And in this particular photograph, the eggs are just starting to divide. The cells are starting to divide. And they'll hatch into larvae. And this is an older larva that was that live in the pond, and they feed on macroinvertebrates in the pond. These Delmarva bays are very rich in aquatic insects and other macroinvertebrates, copepods, ostracods, fairy shrimp, and that's what these salamanders feed on. Here are the fairy shrimp. I'm not sure, some of you may have seen fairy shrimp before. They kind of remind you, they're somewhat related to sea monkeys. If you're my age, you might know what a sea monkey is. And after in late July, beginning of August, they metamorphose. They leave the Delmarva Bay and they go up into the woodlands. And that's where they spend their entire life, in the woodlands, until they come back to breed. A relative of the tiger is a spotted salamander. It breeds in the same place, very similar, Delmarva Bays. It'll lay its eggs just the same. This is a nice egg mass right here in the Delmarva Bays. And the larvae will live in the ponds, and then they get out of the ponds a little bit early. Here's a juvenile just left the ponds. This tiger and the spotted are in the group, like this salamander, Ambystoma. And the common name for that is the mole salamanders because they live underground. Now, this one, the marbled salamander, also breeds in those ponds, Delmarva bays. However, it doesn't go down there when the water's in the pond. It goes down to those bays when it's dry. The males drop a spermatophore, the females pick them up, insert her into her cloaca, the male leaves, and the female digs down into the bottom of the pond. It's dry though. There's no water because she's doing this in September, October. And she lays her eggs and she stays with them and guards them. She's waiting until those ponds start to fill up. As soon as the water hits those eggs, they hatch. She leaves. She goes back to the forest. And the larvae look like this. Very similar to the tigers. Last night when we were in the ponds, my students were catching lots of these little larvae, just like this. And when they're in the ponds, they have these big, nice, fluffy gills. That's what you're seeing right here. When they're ready to move out of the ponds in late May, early June, they lose those gills. They kind of start to get a little bit of gray flecking. And then they crawl out of the pond up. If there's a road, they cross the road and get into the woodlands where they'll live until they become adults. That's an adult. That's an adult male. Very ubiquitous salamander is the redback salamander, eastern redback salamander, Plethodon cinereus. And it's found all over the mid-Atlantic. It is a woodland species, though. It never goes to water. It lays its eggs under logs or deep down in the like a animal burrow, and the eggs go through their larval stage within the egg. So when the eggs hatch, they're just miniature adults. And they're called redbacks because most of them have red backs, but they also, here's a nice redback one. They can be a little orangey too. And this is their habitat, any woodlands. If you turn over any log in the woods around here, you might find them. Not now, it's just a little too cold. Oops, sorry. But they have the redback, and then they have this one that's all dark. We call it the leadback. They vary, and they're just color morphs, that's all. They're the same species, and they can breed together. We have several species of salamanders that live in streams. I'm not going to talk to all of them. But I'll show you one. One's very common, northern dusky salamander. It's found in just about every stream. Turn over enough rocks, you'll find one. A long-tailed salamander. Now, this is not as common. This salamander likes not every stream. It's in fact only found in the Piedmont. And it's only found in very clean, cold streams. And they are streams that just come out of the ground, springs. So they come out at the spring heads. They live in these very cold, 55-degree, all year round springs. Sometimes they do venture downstream, and you can find them out, but they don't get very far from these spring heads. You also find them in these structures called spring houses. And if you live around Philadelphia, north or west, or even south in Chester County, you'll notice these things in the landscape. Every farm before electricity had one of these. They built a stone, usually a stone structure over top the spring head where the water came out of the ground. And they could use this house, not to live, but to keep their goods, keep their anything from spoiling in the summertime, because inside there it'd be 50 to 55 all year round. So their milk, any items that might spoil in warm weather. Also, they kept things in there from freezing in the winter. And the salamanders love these houses because they treat them like a cave. And they move into these places in August, and they move down into the springs, and they spend all winter in the springs. But as they move in those houses, you can actually see them. And my friend got his PhD, his PhD thesis was on long-tailed salamanders. So we spent several years studying these in spring houses. This is a larva. Sometimes we go into these houses in the right time of year, in like September, and there'll be as many as 300 of them in there. And they'll, most of these will hang around in the spring house for a while, but then move into the groundwater in a couple of weeks. Some of them that will mate and lay eggs in the spring house. This is a female laying eggs. This is a screen that we put in there because the Nate needed to, we wanted to count the eggs a little better. So we gave them a substrate for the female to lay the eggs on. This is just a photo of a recently hatched egg. You still see the gills just starting and the little front legs coming out. And this is a little older. And again, the larvae will leave the spring house and go out into the springs, seeps on the surface, and they'll live under this vegetation. So reptiles. Again, I didn't cover all the amphibians. You're probably saying, "Oh, you didn't cover the carpenter frog, or you didn't cover my favorite cricket frog." But we'd be here all night if I did that. So I kind of stayed somewhat basic into the more common ones. Now the reptiles are going to talk about some that aren't quite as common. Let's start with turtles though, because I love turtles. Turtles are great because they're easy to find most of the time. Not all of them, but most of them. This one here, the eastern painted turtle, I bet every single person out there has seen one. They're in every pond, slow moving stream in the area. And if you go out on a sunny morning after somewhat of a cool night, even this time of year, they're going to be basking. This is a little male basking on a log, and this is what they love to do. Here's a hatchling. They of course, all reptiles nest on land. They lay their eggs or they have live born, but the turtles lay eggs. And this painted turtle was, someone brought them to me. Turtles laid the 2 eggs in their garden, and they dug them up and they brought them to me. So I kept them and hatched them so I could get some photos, and then I reduced them. But you notice I wanted to show you this little structure here. This is called an egg tooth. It's like it's keratin or keratinized. It's like your fingernail. And the turtles within the egg have those. They lose those after about 6 months after hatching. But they use them to kind of scar the egg from the inside. And it helps them to crack the egg and get out. Without that egg tooth, they could be trapped inside. And all turtles have that. Here's just another picture of this. Again, the females are bigger than the males, but they don't get very big. Females get 6 inches, maybe. Males, 4 or 5. Sometimes they're confused with this guy. And this is the northern red-bellied cooter, Pseudomys rubiventris. And if you're, again, I refer to Philly because this is, where you guys, or maybe the Arboretum is. This turtle occurs only on the coastal plain in Philadelphia. So down by the airport and John Hines Refuge and a few other places, I was able to do surveys there years ago and document all the places that they occur. They're very common, though, as you move down into Delmarva. And they occur in every pond, every body of water that you can find. In fact, this photograph was actually taken in Tinicum, now that I think about it. But this turtle's large. It looks a little bit like a painted turtle, but these guys get to be 12 to 14 inches in shell length. And this, again, like painted turtles, you'll see them basking. Now, this is a red belly. This is a young red belly. This is a painted turtle, another red belly. Red bellies, when they get older, they tend to have all dark heads. They get much bigger. Another turtle I'm sure you're all familiar with is the eastern box turtle, Terrapini carolina. It's found all over the mid-Atlantic. It's a woodland species. Tends to live in woodlands that are associated with meadows because the females lay their eggs in the meadows, but they live most of their life in the woodlands. They come in all different colors, from a relatively dull color like this to some really bright orangey colors, all the same species. These are a pair that I actually flipped over, and I don't do this naturally, because I wanted to show you how to differentiate a male from a female, which is always fun. An adult male will have a concave bottom shell. We call the bottom shell plastron. Top shell is the carapace. So it looks like it has an indentation, basically, in the plastron. Female does not. The other thing you notice well in this photograph is the hinge. They have a hinge plastron that allows them to close up totally. That's why they're called box turtles. There's some other ways to sex turtles, box turtles, and I'll go through them right quickly. Again, the male's concave plastron. Males tend to have red or bright orange eyes. Not always, but tend to. The tail on a male is very long, and the cloacal opening is beyond the carapace, the shell. This is an underview. The claws are curled in the males and strong, robust. Females have that flat plastron. They have brown eyes, brown or yellow. The tail is very short. The cloaca is within the shell, right here. And the hind claws are straighter and more slender than the males. Here's a mating pair, and we'll illustrate why the male has the concave plastron, and that's so he can sit up on the female shell. Now he's leaning back in this photograph. Also illustrates why they have robust hind feet, claws, because he has to get them hooked in the female's shell to hold on to her while he mates. A lot of people ask me if I can age turtles. And box turtles, you can age to a certain point. Turtles tend to be long-lived, and box turtles are probably the most long-lived of our turtles. They can live easily up until the 80s if nothing runs over them. And each year they put out a ring, like a tree, a scoot. We call them scoots. And you can age them up until about age, I don't know, 17, 18. Then those scoots start to grow together. So if you find a young box turtle, you can age it just by counting those. However, after 17, you can't. And the vast majority of turtles you find are over 17. It just seems to be the way it is. In fact, most turtles are in the 30s probably. Another ubiquitous species is the common snapping turtle, Chelydra serpentina. It's the dinosaur of our reptile world today here on Delmarva or in the Mid-Atlantic. It's our largest terrestrial turtle. When I say terrestrial, other than sea turtles. Beautiful turtle, a living dinosaur. It's feisty. They're probably the only reptile that its bite will actually hurt you, other than one of the snakes, or actually a couple of snakes. So you never want to mess with one's head, and they have very fast reflexes, and they have very long necks. So it's always best to leave them alone when you find them. Don't pick them up. Don't pick them up by the tail. That can injure them. You can pick them up by the shell, but you need a pair of gloves, and you need probably a little practice. Or at least have done it once or twice. Well, I suggest leave them alone. These are eggs. They lay up to 50 eggs. Very ping pong ball like. These were eggs that were dug up. They were laid in a construction site in some sand. They were using for cement, so they had to use the sand. So I went over there and picked up all the eggs, and then I took them home and hatched them. But again, I cleaned this one off, very ping pong ball shape. These are the hatchlings. And in this particular brood, there were about 48 eggs and 44 hatched. And of course, I promptly let them all go. And even as youngsters, this is about a 2-year-old, they're feisty. Which, again, endears them to me. I think they're a real survivor, a very ancient type of turtle. It's great they still exist here. This is also the turtle that we eat. If you eat turtle soup, snapper soup, this is the species. It's harvested, legally harvested. You may not know this turtle, or you may. It was actually the common name's been changed, but I still call it stinkpot. It's called the common musk turtle now, Sternotherus odoratus, and it's called that even in the scientific name because when you catch it, it often will give off a very strong musk from its cloaca. And again, this is a defensive mechanism that hopefully would dissuade a predator that would make it distasteful. But it does smell. They don't all do it, but a lot of them do. Here's a young one. They're quite cute when they're young. got nice striped heads. You can see, there's only one. He just hatched. Although when I say just hatched, he's at least 5 months old because he's lost the egg tooth. We kid around and we joke that they're the only arboreal turtle in Delaware. Arboreal meaning tree dwelling. They really don't live in trees, but they will climb up trees up until I've seen them up at least 10 feet in a tree that's overhanging a body of water. And they do that just to bask. Of course, as soon as you get near them, they just plop in the water. Red-eared slider, you may have heard of this one. This is a non-native species. I'm sure you've heard a lot about non-native species, plants and animals. But this turtle was introduced back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. It now lives in basically every pond that you'll come across, including John Hines and any pond in Delaware or Maryland. They, in the 50s and 60s, and that was kind of when I was growing up, they were sold by the hundred thousands well, in those days, 5 and 10s, and not a lot of 5 and 10s left, but little kind of mini department stores. And you'd go in, and of course, they'd have 50 of them in a little bucket or something. They'd sell them to you for 50 cents. If you're, of course, I remember begging my parents every time I went in. Finally, I did get one. I can't remember if they actually bought it or my dad talked somebody out of it. But anyway, usually they also want you sold the turtle for 50 cents, but then they want you. This is just a group of them. How you see them. They were raised in turtle farms. They make you want. They try to encourage you to buy one of these plastic things to keep the turtle in, which weren't really good things to keep turtles in. Of course, my turtle, actually, I hate to admit it, but my turtle died. Probably, I can't remember exactly, but probably I didn't take care of it right. But some of the turtles, a lot of kids were better than I was and grew them up. And then when they went away to college or whatever, they released them. And now they're in every pond. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, what damage are they doing? Which is a great question, because most invasive species do have negative effects on native animals. However, we haven't really seen a whole lot of that happening yet. And it's been almost 50 years, it has been 50 years. And so they seem to be coexisting with the native turtles fairly well, at least in this area. But again, you never know. Time will tell. A native turtle, though, that's very ubiquitous or very common on Delmarva and down in Virginia, not so much in New York, although they do occur in off Jersey and in New York along the coast. The diamondback terrapin. If you notice its distribution, it's a estuarine turtle. Estuarine is just a word for estuary, which is the bays along the Delaware Bay, the Chesapeake Bay, and of course some of the bays farther north. They're a big turtle. They're big, live in big water, open water. So they have to be very good swimmers. And you notice there's two big size differences here. There's these two big ones here. They're females. And then all these other guys are males. And you can see the males have these long tails. Look how little that female tail is, even though she's huge. Big size difference in male and female. And of course, they have large webbed feet, very good swimmers. They have to be because they live in, again, these bays. They don't go out very far from the shore, but they go out. They spend a lot of time, though, in the back rivulets and marshes where they feed on fiddler crabs and other crustaceans and some mollusks. This is a turtle that's eaten, especially in the Orient. And it used to be exported in large numbers, but they've really controlled that recently because the numbers plummeted in the 60s and 70s. But now they seem to be coming back, at least in our area. This is typically how you see them. You just see their heads. They do bask. I showed you some pictures of basking, but often you just see the heads out there. It's interesting. They're associated in their feeding behavior with horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs, of course, if you've ever been down in New Jersey and in the Delaware Bay and the Chesapeake Bay, The horseshoe crabs come up in May and early June on the full moons, and they spawn and they lay their eggs. But the diamondbacks will congregate off the coast, off the shore, and feed on the eggs. This is what the eggs look like if you haven't seen them. And they'll just gorge on these eggs that are washed out from the beach. Here's a female diamondback terrapin laying her eggs. Her eggs, she lays those on sandy beaches in May, mid-May to June. Here's a hatchling, just hatched. It's hatching when I photographed it. There's that egg tooth again. Quickly go through these guys. A spotted turtle. I put that in because this guy is one of the first turtles to become active, and they're active right now. They live in very shallow wetlands, kind of along the coast usually, or along rivers. And in the very early spring, on sunny days, they'll bask. Not commonly encountered. Beautiful turtles. Some of them have almost a constellation of spots. Some of them have very few spots. And then a relative is the bog turtle, Glyptomes muhlenbergii. It is found only on the Piedmont now. This map shows it a little bit on the coastal plain, but they don't occur there anymore. And there are populations in Pennsylvania around Philadelphia. These are the smallest turtles in the world. They're only, the largest they get is 4 inches in their shell length. They're kind of nondescript except for these bright orange patches on their neck. These are a endangered species, a federally endangered species. And they only live in these certain bogs, usually along rivers, old boggy areas. Not in the river, just in those real muddy. And they spend most of their time down in the mud. They make tunnels. They live in those tunnels. Very difficult to find. And this guy, I caught it, and then I released it. I was doing surveys. The first thing he did is dove straight down. And this is kind of how they bask. They really, sometimes they'll come all the way up, but often they just kind of show their little bit of their shell, and it collects enough warmth for them. Very difficult to find, which is good because they're very endangered. Very few populations still around, and even those populations are having issues. It's just another kind of an old one. Since they burrow so much, their shell gets very worn. The last turtle, I think it's the last turtle. Oh no, I got to. Is the wood turtle. Now, wood turtles don't occur in my state, Delaware. However, they do occur in Maryland and Pennsylvania, New York. These are just really interesting turtles. I actually have a radio transmitter on one that I'm tracking for the last 3 years. Just really, really interesting turtles. They used to be kept as pets back in the 50s and 60s, but they're a species that in most states are protected. It may actually become a federally threatened species in the near future. We do have sea turtles off the coast, but I'm not going to talk about them in detail. I'm just going to go through the species. So in the Delaware Bay, Chesapeake Bay, Atlantic Ocean, we do have sea turtles. The loggerhead sea turtle is the most common. It nests regularly here on Delmarva. It does nest in Virginia somewhat, a little bit, not much. And but more and more, we think they're going to start nesting in Northern Virginia and in Delaware, Delmarva, because of climate change. Kemp's Ridley sea turtle is a rare species, but actually spends a lot of time in the Delaware Bay feeding on crabs, especially the juveniles, the young ones. The leatherback sea turtle, the largest reptile, the heaviest by far. This turtle can be 6 feet in length. It doesn't nest here on Delmarva, but it does swim off coast. And some years they feed on jellyfish. So if there's a large jellyfish congregation, they'll follow it. And one year they came into the Delaware Bay. The green sea turtle, which is a more subtropical, warm water turtle, is a vegetarian. And you don't see them much up here. Every once in a while, they do make it up into the Chesapeake Bay. And then Atlantic hawksbill, another southern turtle, tropical turtle. See it, but very, very infrequent. So let's talk. We have a few lizards, not many. The northern fence lizard. This is a lizard that is on Delmarva. It's only on the coastal plain, but it does pop up here and there up in Pennsylvania. It's a very lizard-like, animal. If you saw it, you'd call it a lizard right away. It's kind of rough scaled. Here's one. They like to hang around logs, especially on sunny mornings. They'll bask. So whenever I see, especially when I'm in sandy areas, when I see piles of wood or something, I always look close because here's one right here. We also have the common five-line skink. There's a couple other species. There's the coal skink, a few others, but this is the most common in the Mid-Atlantic. There's a female. The males have when they're breeding, kind of bright heads, bright red heads. And when the juveniles, they have bright blue tails, which are really interesting. There's also the broad-headed skink, which is really a southern species, but does make its way on Delmarva. We haven't found it in Delaware yet, but in Maryland, and in Virginia, we found it. It's a very large skink, as much as a foot in length. This is a male, red head. So there's a male and female. They're very common in the southeastern United States. Let's do some snakes pretty quickly. And I'll start with a very widespread, common little guy, a very small snake that rarely gets to be a foot in length, called the northern brown snake, Sterei decay. Actually, they changed the common name back to the Decay's brown snake. Decay was a herpetologist. So again, small, about a foot. It's found just about everywhere. In fact, it's even found in cities. In Philadelphia, New York City, I found it in Wilmington, where I grew up. As long as you have a vacant lot that has some debris or something, you can find these snakes. And in fact, one of the names is the city snake. Here they have live young. There's a female that gave birth, and I had her in captivity. The young are really small, but this is the hatch, a newborn. That's a diamond. Another ubiquitous animal is the garter snake, the eastern garter snake. And we're starting to see them right now. As the days get warmer, they'll pop up, and they can be in your garden. You go out on your front step, there's a garter snake. Even in suburbia, a pretty common snake, found just about everywhere. They're feisty, I will say, and if you try to pick one up, they'll bite you, but they're harmless. They feed primarily on toads and fish. Sometimes they'll take other frogs. This is a female eating a male, a female toad. Notice she's eating her hind legs first because frogs kick a lot. So they try to subdue them by their hind legs. Here's a male, though, trying to mate with the female garter snake at the same time. Very common snake, a common water snake. And it's in every body of water in this area, in the Mid-Atlantic. And they're starting to come out right now also. So if you go down to a stream or a pond in the morning, if it's sunny, you might see them on the shore basking. But as the name implies, they're a water snake. Spend a lot of time in the water looking for fish, frogs. There's a juvenile. Juveniles are marked very well. They're often mistaken for venomous snakes. Here's a pair of water snakes. This is the female, the big one. And the male is this guy here. Here's his eyes. And he goes up and around. And he's hanging around her, hoping to mate with her. I guess she wasn't quite responsive at this point. I took the photograph. And as they get large, they get almost a meter in length. They lose a lot of that coloration and become almost all brown or almost black. Again, they get kind of big, the feisty. This is one of my students caught one. I encourage my kids to try to catch them. Most of them get bitten by them, but they're harmless. And it's kind of a badge of courage. The black rat snake, sometimes called the eastern rat snake, Pantherophis allegheniensis, is one of our most arboreal species. It climbs trees extremely well. And it's climbing trees looking for birds and bird nests. There's one, and when I say well, it's amazing. They go right up a limbless tree. This, if you notice, this tree is not even that rough. The bark's not that rough. Amazing climbers. And sometimes you find them in your house if you have an older house. They're harmless. They can be big. They can be up to 5.5, almost 6 feet. Juveniles are very different. They're very well patterned. They lose this after about 2 or 3 years. Here's a big one caught by one of my students. He was about, I don't know, 5'7", 5'8". You notice he paid a little bit of the price. You can see what it bid him on a hand. Again, no ill effect. A relative of the rat snake is the corn snake. I want to show you this because if you're from Jersey, corn snakes are relatively common over there. Well, I shouldn't say common, but they do occur. In Delaware and Delmarva, they only occur in one spot, and that's in southeastern Delaware. And they don't occur any farther north. Beautiful snake. You see them a lot in the pet trade. People breed them. King snake. You may have heard of it. The king snake, eastern king snake. It's gets its name because it feeds on other snakes. It used to be called the chain king snake. Much more common on sandy soil, but it does occur other places. Beautiful animals. Feed mainly on rodents and other snakes. Eastern milk snake, it's related to the king snake. This snake is found primarily on the Piedmont, but it does occur on the coastal plain, and they're associated often with stone walls. We find them very commonly with stone walls up in northern Delaware and in Pennsylvania. Beautiful snakes, though. Look a little bit like the corn snakes. Hognose, one of the most interesting of our snakes. On Delmarva, it is only on the coastal plain, but it does occur in spotty areas in Pennsylvania. But they're kind of rare up there nowadays. Heterodon platyrhinos. And you can see why they're called hognose. They have that upturned nose. They're especially common down in the maritime areas, the coastal areas. And they feed exclusively on toads. Flowers toads or American toads. They do lay eggs. This is a batch that I found. I took two of them home and hatched them. Notice they do not have egg teeth. Quite handsome animals. But the neat thing about them is their defense mechanisms. If you get near one of them, they get agitated. They fan their necks out, look like a cobra. Sometimes they even get up and wave back and forth like a cobra. And they'll strike, but not at you. They just strike in the thin air. I mean, they have no purpose in their strike. In fact, they almost never bite you. I've never been bitten by one. Never met somebody. They do come in different colors, but black all the way, melanistic all the way to the bright ones. But if that cobra behavior doesn't work, and they hiss also, one of the few snakes that hiss. If that doesn't work, they play dead. They feign death. They turn over, flatten out, open their mouth, look all the world like they're dead. In fact, even if you pick them up, as one of my students picked one up, I like to have them pick one up if we find one, because it feels like it's dead. It feels like it's been on a hot road for a few hours. But then you put it down, and within 20 minutes, it'll flip over and just leave. There's another one. And they'll flip over and just, if you give them enough space, they'll just move away. Really fun snakes. You don't want to keep one in captivity because getting a supply of toads to feed them is next to impossible in the winter. So now we're into the venomous snakes, the last. The only venomous snake on Delmarva is the copperhead. Okay, then that's Delmarva. But as you move into the mountains of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and other places, you pick up another species. So, let's talk about the copperhead. It is found in Pennsylvania and New York. It's usually associated with woodlands. Here's a beautiful one. And if you look real close, you can see the vertical pupil in the pit viper. It's a pit viper. And you notice the bands are narrow on the top of the back. and they widen on the sides. There's another shot showing that heat-sensitive pit, and that allows the snake to sense infrared heat from a mammalian or a bird prey, a warm-blooded prey. What they do, they find a spot like this, they sit there, and they just wait. And hopefully they picked a good spot. And if a rodent or bird comes by, they strike it, they hit it with their fangs, inject venom, let it go, let the prey go. And let's just say it's a white-footed mouse. That white-footed mouse would run away and would get a certain distance away before that venom took effect. And it might only be 50 yards, might be a little longer, higher, but then that snake has to find that mouse. And that's where these heat sensing pits come in handy. They then track the heat trail that was left by the white-footed mouse as it ran away. They'll follow that trail slowly until they find the dead mouse. And that's how all the pit vipers feed. They do not hold on to their prey. They hit it and let it go. They track it with that heat-sensing organ. There's another copperhead with a vertical pupil. There's the pit right there. And right now, it's got its tongue out. It's smelling with its tongue. They can also sense with the tongue. So they can also sense if a mouse uses the trail frequently just by the smell it leaves, or it's getting close to a mouse nest. Juveniles and copperheads have bright yellow tails. It looks like they were dipped in yellow paint, but they lose this before the first year is up. But you can clearly see that vertical pupil. A lot of people say, well, if it has an arrow-shaped head, it's venomous. That's not always true because, like I showed you, the hognose does that. Even the rat snakes will widen out their head. Now, I will say the pit vipers have a wider head because this is where the venom glands are, on the sides of the head. Cottonmouth. Now, cottonmouths only occur as far north as Virginia, Newport News, Virginia. You find them no other places. They do not occur on Delmarva. They don't go up into Pennsylvania, or in Maryland. A little bit in Maryland. No cottonmouths. I know I get reports of them every year, and they're never cottonmouths. Of course, you go south, where I'm going tonight. I'm leaving for Florida right after this program. I'll be seeing them pretty commonly. There's they're called cottonmouths because they have a bright white. So if you ever get a photograph, you think it's a copperhead, you can send it to me, and I'll be glad to look at it. And if it is a cottonmouth on Delmarva, I'll give you a 6-pack of beer, good beer. Now, this snake does occur in the Mid-Atlantic, not on Delmarva, but it does occur, of course, in New Jersey, in the Pine Barrens. It does occur in Pennsylvania, in the mountains, in Maryland, in the mountains, and in New York. It's the timber rattlesnake. Beautiful animal. We think they did occur on Delmarva, but because this was the first settled area in the United States by the Europeans and the first area to be cleared of every tree by the end of the 1700s, we think rattlesnakes were just eradicated from the area. They still do persist, though. As I said, in the mountains, you can go up into Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania. They're not common, but they do occur there. In Maryland, Catoctin, some of the mountains, you'll find them. And of course, in New York, you'll see them. But they do not occur here. There is a population in New Jersey. I've never seen them in New Jersey, but they do occur in the Pine Barrens. Okay, I think I'm to my end. So, Amy, you're still out there or sleeping? I can take questions if you like.
I am not sleeping. That was wonderful, Jim. Great. So we already have questions that have come in. So
great.
We're gonna get to work. So in the beginning, you talked a lot about the Delmarva bays. Would you technically call those vernal pools?
Yeah, they are a subset of vernal pools. Yes. Yeah, they're a specific type of vernal pool. Yeah.
Great. There's a question about Do some species of salamanders go back and breed in the bodies of water where they were born?
Probably most. And that's not so much because they have a homing sense. It's because they don't live very far from those ponds. And that's one of the problems with protecting Delmarva Bays. You can't just protect the water. You have to protect the woods around because these salamanders will go out 300 meters from the pond and live. But they typically just go downslope and find the ponds. Yeah.
Mm.
So they typically probably, and my friend Nate Nastrovich, he's actually doing radio tagging tiger salamanders right now.
Mm. Are there any Delmarva bays that can be easily visited as a tourist without causing ecological damage?
Well, there's a couple at Lumps Pond State Park. Now, I don't believe you're allowed to go in it, but you can go very close to it and look at it. Lumps Pond State Park, south of Newark, Delaware. All the other ponds um, in Blackbird State Forest, not all of them are protected, but the main ones are protected. Now, but that doesn't say you can't go down there and look at them, walk around them and see them. But we discourage people from going in the ponds, especially this time of year, because there's egg masses in there. We have to be very careful. Like with my students last night, we took them in a pond, but it was a particular pond and we knew where everything was, and we kind of choreographed it for them so they didn't mess things up. Yeah.
What is the best time of day to listen for frogs and toads?
Well, again, toads are frogs. Yeah, the best time is right now is when the air temperature gets about 65 degrees and stays that way, till about 8 o'clock, and then go out then and listen. Now, if it's raining or very humid, it's even better.
Mm.
So humidity, light rain, warm temperatures. There's when you're listening for frogs.
This one I'm hoping doesn't have a super long answer, but how do you take a turtle survey?
Oh, well, if you're surveying for a particular species, like I was looking for the red bellied cooters. I would go out there. I knew when they would be basking because you go out after a cool evening and it's a very sunny, warm day, and I would get my binoculars or spotting scope, and I'd sit on the sides of the wetlands and just wait for them to come up to bask.
Mm.
A lot of turtles you can do that way. Now, bog turtles you don't. You got to walk through and you're not allowed to survey for bog turtles unless you're certified. So I don't want everybody to do that. But bog turtles, you have to, really look hard, get in the mud, feel around for them. It's different.
Mm-hmm. Regarding the barking tree frog, you write that the northernmost population in New Jersey was believed to be introduced. How is the determination made that they are introduced and not a naturally occurring population?
That's one of the best questions I've heard. In fact, one of the things that when we first found them on Delmarva, the only known population was in New Jersey, as this person is saying. And if you read Roger Connett, which was the father of herpetology on Delmarva, he suggested that they were introduced because they were so far away from any other population. However, in fact, when we first found them in Delmarva, the old timers said, "Oh, they're introduced." But then we found many populations, several. Now, the belief is that those ones in New Jersey were not introduced. They were a relic population, just like the populations that are extant today. They're still here on Delmarva. So most of us believe that even Roger Connett was wrong, which is really kind of hard to say because he was an amazing herpetologist. But they were probably a natural relic population, and they since have died out because of development. But that's a great question.
Someone is asking, and I know you said you made your list and you stuck to it, but what about newts?
I know. I right the last second I took the red spotted newt out. One of my favorite animals. It was all for time. Sorry about that. Newts are great. They're found everywhere. And if you're going to the mountains of Pennsylvania, you'll see the red F stage. Yeah, sorry about that.
Next time.
Next time.
How big of an issue is salmonella when handling turtles?
It's not really a big issue at all handling wild turtles. Yeah. Now I do suggest everybody, if you're handling anything in the wild, wash your hands before you eat. But wild turtles rarely have salmonella. The salmonella was an issue with captive turtles. Those same people that, like me, keeping that red air slider, they would, keep the water would get fouled and they would get salmonella and the salmonella would build and some children got sick. I don't think it's a big issue handling wild turtles. I handle turtles all the time and never had a problem. But I do wash my hands. I mean, I'm not taking too many chances.
Mhm. I was glad that you talked about the red-eared slider as a non-native species. I'm actually curious, I guess I haven't thought much about non-native frogs or snakes or things that are in our area. Is that something that we would run into?
Well, again, it's not that common here.
Mm.
In the temperate regions, most of the pets that people kept came from the tropics. Where I'm going tonight in Florida, it's a totally different situation. There are hundreds of introduced species of fish, reptiles, amphibians. It's crazy down there because it's subtropical. But here we don't have a lot of amphibians and reptiles, at least at this point, because they die out in the winter. We find them. I found all kinds of things, everything from boas in the wild here, but they just recently escaped from somebody. They weren't reproducing.
Mm. Gotcha. And maybe I'll ask you this last one before we wrap up, which is if you had any advice for those of us who have gardens or land, backyards and that type of thing, like what could we be doing in our gardens to help support these creatures that you talked about tonight?
Well, that's great. I have a whole program on herps in the garden.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, well, the more habitat you make in your yard, the better. Just like for birds. So brush piles, any kind of water features, especially little ponds. You'll get frogs in there. But the more natural habitat, native plants you have, the more you're going to get amphibians and reptiles, and the more cover you have.
Wonderful. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time tonight and sharing all of that amazing information. Safe travels down to Florida.
Thank you.
And thank you to all of you who are still with us at this point in the program. And hopefully we'll see you next month. Our topic is I'm not exactly sure of the title off the top of my head, but we're going to be tackling native plants for smaller spaces. So hopefully you guys will join us for our April lecture. All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.